Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Rochester by Water, inviting the community to experience Rochester aboard Rivery and Sam Patch, offering daily lock tours, live music cruises, private charters, and more on the Erie Canal and Genesee River. Details and tickets online at rochesterbywater.org. And One Rock, an alliance of regional economic development organizations, investors, and institutions committed to building Greater Rochester's economic future and driving coordinated growth. Information online at oneroc.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Julie Philipp, filling in for Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour is one that all of us experience at one point or another: the loss of someone we love and the grief that comes with it. In the words of one of my guests today, we don't live in a death and grief literate culture. It's hard to talk about grief, and though it's a universal emotion, sometimes our grief can make us feel very much alone. Often we turn to books to help us work through it and live with it. August 30th is National Grief Awareness Day, and in recognition of that, a local bookstore, Hipocampo Children's Books on South Avenue, is planning a conversation about grief with two local authors who have written books about it. And they're both in studio with me today. Maeve Cullinane is an educator and author of Almost 12, Uncovering My Journey Through Grief. Thank you for joining us today. And we have Dr. Linda Shanti, psychologist and author of After Your Person Dies, Affirmations for Grief, Making Meaning and Going On. Thanks for being with us today. Before we start, I just want to say that we may talk about suicide at some point during this conversation. If you or someone you know is struggling, call or text 988 to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. That's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and services are free and confidential. All right, so let's start out. Both of you wrote books that deal with your own personal experiences with grief. So I want to talk about what happened. And I know there's multiple experiences with grief, but the main person in your books that you're talking about, who that person was, what happened. Can you start?
Yeah. So my book is called Almost 12 because I was almost 12 when my older brother died. And the book is mostly about the year after his death.
Okay, but you wrote it long after his death, correct?
Decades later.
Okay, and do you mind sharing what happened to him? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a spoiler alert for the book, but he did take his own life, and he was in the age of 20, was not living at home at the time, and it was there's a lot of taboo and stigma around suicide, and certainly much more. This was in 1973. Although it still is quite a difficult thing for families and this community around them to support.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure tons has changed. A lot has changed since then. And your book sort of walks through the perspective of a 12-year-old and how the family was dealing with everything that happened.
Yes, and I very intentionally wrote it as the character of a 11, 12-year-old, and wanted to be really authentic to that voice and that experience I've done lots of other writing throughout my life about his death, about other deaths from an adult point of view, perspective, with that kind of understanding and all the processing that you go through with grief. But that's not how it is for a child.
It's a lot different. Okay. All right, Linda, could you talk a little bit about you? I mean, Linda, yes. Make sure I get you two right. Your experience, what the person your book is about.
Well, the person, my book's called After Your Person Dies, and my person was my husband, Jonathan, who died of pancreatic cancer. My dad had died 3 months previous to that. And the book is actually written, it's not necessarily about him, although he's, present. You can feel him present in the book, but it's more for then what? Right. For all the people that are in
living
the then
living
what
with that
Yeah.
experience. Okay, I want to read a chapter from Maeve's book, and that's Almost 12. It's a chapter called Time to Speak. I'm just going to read a paragraph. The truth is, no one wants to talk about death or loss. We don't know how to have conversations about pain. It is difficult to be open to pain, either as part of mourning or as part of living. And when someone is in pain, deep pain that alters their daily perspective, most conversations feel superficial or miss the mark or hold triggers and daggers that make things worse. I am guessing that is part of the reason you decided to write about your own experience with grief. But could you tell us about what made you decide to make this experience so public?
Yeah, I think that for me, that death happened when I was very, very young, and there have been other deaths, grandparents, other people who have had cancer or died that maybe seem more typical in a lifespan to have to experience. And I started to feel like there was a lack of resources out there. There's certainly lots of books about grief, but I still felt like there was not just didn't bring up enough about the emotional experience and the being very plain and very honest and direct about the kinds of things that come up for sure around suicide. Also for people who have lived with family members or friends who have had attempts at suicide or dealt with other mental health challenges, other kinds of pain and loss.
Mm-hmm. So you felt like you were filling a void in an already difficult conversation to have. Okay. All right. How about you, Linda? What motivated you to write about after your person dies?
I think originally, so my son was 8 when my husband, his papa, died. And originally it was going to be a picture book for kids, which I was very excited about. And my son was moderately excited about. And it soon became clear that he really, at 8, did not want to be a grief expert. Mm-hmm. Nobody really does, but some of us take
So
up
you were
the
actually
challenge more than
talking
others.
with him to try to like get what his perspective was, and he was not interested in the interview.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I think from there I flipped into my therapist mode, and I was like, I'm going to write a book about grief theory and what to do when you're grieving. And I think of it kind of like, first it was my gut that wanted to write the book, like the part that was just wrenched open for my son, and then it was my head. That was like, let me just bypass this and tell everybody else what to do. And then my heart came in, and the book really kind of wrote itself from there because I did all the paintings first, and I did not know what this book was going to become. This was not the plan, and this is the book that came out.
And it is a beautifully illustrated book, I should say.
Thank you.
Yes. So both of you came from a spot of trying to deal with something, put something on paper that didn't really exist out there in your minds. Is it?
And I would say the other part of how my book started was my intention was not to publish something. It was actually part of a writing exercise. And I can really relate to Linda's experience of, I was doing all this art. I didn't really know where it was going. I was writing this story. I created a character who was a girl and then was trying to tap into, what I remembered about being that age, and then thought, oh, I have a few experiences from that age that actually are a totally different story, and so later went and worked more on that. But I think that the process of creating, whether it's like Linda doing art, or for me as a young person, definitely I wrote lots of poetry. I wrote lots of lovely, beautiful things. They weren't per se about the loss of my brother, but they were about all the feelings that I was feeling, and I needed a creative way
to put those feelings out, though. All right, so I want to have you, let's start with you, Maeve, read a passage about your book, from your book, and if you need to give us a little advance background on that passage, go ahead.
Sure, I'll read. Well, you had read the other passage, which is from one of the reflective essays that are in the book. The other chapters in the book is storytelling. It's stories
more
about
biographical,
right? More autobiographical. So I'm going to read from one of the later sections there. And I think really all you need to know is there is a person, Mary Ann, that I mentioned, and she was a sixth grade friend of mine. Okay. Otherwise, it's self-explanatory. So this is from chapter 3. The day after the funeral service, things seemed to be wrapping up. The relatives were starting to leave. Friends were fussing over my parents, asking if they had everything they needed. We had lots of food, for sure, but I wondered about my parents. My dad sat in the den a lot. My mom sat in a corner of the living room. Did we have everything we needed? What was going to happen next? Mary Ann called me on Sunday and asked me when I was coming back to school. She added that it was the final week of Julius Caesar rehearsals. I had totally forgotten about it. Luckily, I hadn't missed it. Could I go to school on Monday? I didn't know. I wasn't sure whom I would ask. Surely somebody would tell me when to go back to school.
It's interesting to me that, and I'm not trying to call you old, but you're going
around
back
many decades.
quite a while, and that just feels so genuine that really has stuck with you, that moment, all of these years.
So two things there. One is I did have a bunch of diaries, the lovely little leather diaries with a little lock and a key from those days.
I hope kids still use those.
And but interestingly, I did not write a lot about my brother in those, but I did write about a lot of other just very ordinary things, and that helped bring back quite a few memories. I also am I am a writer, and I do a lot of fiction writing, and so I really used a lot of those skills of trying to figure out, lay the scene and use those details.
I want to ask both of you, what was the hardest part or parts of the book for you to write?
I'd say the hardest was that I did not, did not start the book while my mother was alive. Mm-hmm. And I think just the relationship that I had a very good relationship with her, but was always very protective, and the loss of her son was traumatic, and
you felt like it would be too painful to.
Yeah, I didn't even consider writing it, and I think that a year or so after she died, I realized I did have more that I wanted to say, and felt I could be more open.
And that kind of goes with both of you. In your books, you're talking about grief doesn't necessarily go away. You live with grief, and that was one of the ways you live with grief, is to not bring it up so much with your mother, even though you had things to still process. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, Linda, how about you? What was the hardest part of your book to write?
I think the book itself was actually quite easy to write. I think it was letting it be what it was going to be, rather than trying to write the book I thought I should write. Mm-hmm. So I did all the paintings first. I had no idea how they were going to come together, and I just painted them. And then actually writing from the paintings was not that hard. I mean, it's hard. It's like it takes forever to travel between your head to your heart, and it doesn't take any time at all, right, when you give it the time. So, when I actually wrote the affirmations from the paintings, that came, I mean, that was probably a couple hours, really.
Wow.
I would say the hard part is, and this might be true for you, Maeve, too, was kind of becoming the person that wrote the book, right? Like becoming that person, and you become that person through the writing of the book.
Right. You couldn't have written it right after your husband's passing. You had to become this. And the hard part was getting your son to cooperate with the book that you didn't end up writing. So would you like to read a passage from your book as well?
Sure. I'll read just the beginning of the introduction to set the stage a little, and then I'll read one of the affirmations. So the introduction says, nothing in my doctorate program in psychology prepared me for the land of grief, which is not uncommon, by the way, unfortunately. When my dad died, followed by my husband 3 months later, I felt thrown completely into unknown territory. Like many people who haven't traveled with grief, I thought grief was a very sad, scary place that you visited for a few months, maybe a year if you were going slow, and then moved on. I thought it would be linear, follow stages, and then be completed. I thought the stupid things people say were appropriate things to say, or that saying nothing was a good thing to say. Oops.
Big oops, yeah.
And then I picked one of the paintings that's called Traveling the Path of the Heart is Not for the Faint of the Heart. Oh, by the way, I have 2 caveats.
Okay.
One, since I'm a therapist, this is not psychological or advice or treatment. I'm completely speaking today from the perspective of a griever, an expressive artist, and a widowed mom.
Thank you.
Also, if I cry, I am going to offer you permission to cry too,
Which may
grief
happen.
Is messy.
I was thinking we should have Kleenexes in this room today.
Yes, especially if we take callers that are crying. I'm just going to give you permission if I cry. Okay, so it says, grief shatters open your heart. You may feel as if your heart is outside of your body, perhaps with your loved one. Perhaps your heart feels so open that it scares you, as if it had no rib cage encasing it. We often think the pain will lessen over time, which it can, and it often does. But our hearts will never be the same. Why would they be? They have been broken open. If you listen, your heart will talk to you about what it needs and wants. Does it need to go to nature or light a candle? Does it want to consider dating? Does it never want to date again? Does it need to cry? Our hearts are wise and kind and clear. You may want to shut down your heart because the pain can feel too much to bear. Please don't shut it down. Listen. Ask your heart to write you a letter. Here is what my heart told me. Thank you for still being open to joy and connection. Thank you for believing in stars and music and love. I know your head wants to tell you all the ways things went wrong, but I, your heart, know how to be with pain. It is never a mistake to open me. You are so brave to continue to allow me to feel. That is how I grow bigger. I went numb for a bit in order to survive, and when numbness thaws, it is painful. What used to be ice is now a waterfall. Let it gush. You were scared and hurt, and grief is hard. Not for the faint of heart, grief. I am not faint. I am strong, courageous, and resilient. I'm still here, open, thawing, thriving. I might need to rest or go slower than your mind. Please talk more kindly to me. Stop telling me what I should and shouldn't be feeling. I'm just trying to heal. Let me. That's my job. Tell me I'm doing a good job. Tell me I can find a way to live and love again. Don't shut me down. I love you so much. I'm still beating. Keep going. I'm with you, and I am not faint.
Whew, that was beautiful. And thank you, Julie Williams, our producer, who brought tissues in during that. It's a little early, but I think maybe it'd be a good time for a little break here. We are talking about grief with Maeve Cullinane, author of Almost 12, Uncovering My Journey Through Grief, and Dr. Linda Shanti, author of After Your Person Dies, Affirmations for Grief, Making Meaning and Going On. As you know, we have talked a bit about suicide, and we may bring it up again during the next half hour of the show. If you or someone you know is struggling, call or text 988 to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. week. Services are free and confidential. When we come back, we will continue our conversation, and you can call us at 263-9994 if you have anything you want to say, or you can call toll-free 844-295-TALK, 844-295-8255. We also have an email, connections@wxxi.org, or you can leave comments on the WXXI News YouTube live stream. We will be back in just a minute.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. Proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, focused on the news, issues, and trends that shape the lives of listeners in the Rochester and Finger Lakes regions. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com. And Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, working with members to find health coverage for every stage of life, helping to make care and coverage more accessible in more ways for more people across the Rochester community. Details online at excellusbcbs.com.
You're listening to Connections. I'm Julie Philipp, in for Evan Dawson today, and we're here with Maeve Cullinane, author of Almost 12, Uncovering My Journey Through Grief, and Dr. Linda Shanti, author of After Your Person Dies, Affirmations for Grief, Making Meaning, and Going On. Now, you both have touched on this a little bit, but we all have heard about the 5 stages of grief and the book, on death and dying, and we think we know what to expect, and then we get there, and it's just not what we expected. It's not a linear experience. Could you talk about that in your own experiences? Why don't we start with you?
I think that the 5 stages of grief are fabulous as a description rather than a prescription. So they describe the experience of grief that we experience again and again and again, not in a linear order. And they don't lead us to any kind of endpoint. And David Kessler has also added a 6th stage, by the way, making meaning, finding meaning, which I think is wonderful. I think he's doing really good work in the world. And the 5 stages were originally written by Kubler-Ross to describe the experience of someone that is in the death process, not the bereaved person that's survived their the loss of their person, and they were not they're not research based. So that would be my critique, but I think they're wonderful. I just think the problem is that other grief theories, which I find to be so much more helpful and relevant, like the dual processing model or continuing bonds or the resilience theory, or there's so many that people don't know about. So then when they have this experience of grief, they think, okay, I'm going to go through these 5 stages, then I'm going to complete them, and then I'm going to be done. And it really does grievers a disservice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I actually mentioned that book, the Kubler-Ross book, in my book. That and because I was a child, Free to Be You and Me was big in the 70s. And I think for me, the importance of those books was that they were affirmations of, like, it's okay to have really big feelings. And as Linda said, the Kubler-Ross's book was, here are some of the big feelings, or the big, not stages so much, but aspects of grief that you're probably going to feel these ways at different times. I think that 6th stage of adding meaning has been very important as an adult, because you have to always ask, and particularly with suicides, you're like, why are we, dealing with all? Like, why did this happen? Why are we dealing with this? Why do,
questions that you're never going to be able to answer.
You don't, but you do need to find a way in yourself about, so what are you going to do with this experience? And not, what was its purpose necessarily, but just what am I going to do with this? And the same, I think, with big feelings.
Mm-hmm. So there's value to these books in the sense that they let you know what maybe the adults in your life or anyone around you can't vocalize. That by having it reading, you recognize that you're not alone in what you're going through, but they don't necessarily say it all. It's not going to hit everything. And I want to read another chapter from one of the books. This is Linda's book, After Your Person Dies, just part of a chapter called You Will Need to Grieve the Future You Imagined. I thought I would be bringing my English husband tea in bed every morning and hear him grumpily say twirly, the way he said too early, until we were very, very old. I thought we would raise our child together, attend his high school and college graduations, his wedding, meet our grandchildren. I thought he would lead us on camping adventures, wrestle with our son, coach the soccer team. I thought he would teach our son woodworking and how to pitch a tent. I thought we would be traveling around Europe, where he would navigate us through Italy and France, knowing I suck at directions even with a GPS. I thought we would live in our house across from the ocean, going for walks with our walking sticks along the beach. When our person dies, we have to grieve the future we imagined we would have and live our way into a new one. And so I think those stages of grief, what they don't say is that when they're done, they're done. That's not what happens. And that's what I think people sort of, if I can just get through these stages. But that's not your experience at all. You want to start?
Whew, that's hard to hear.
But it is really, by being personal, I can relate to that. I can picture the person in my life. And I think it's really wonderful that you wrote that.
Yeah, thank you. I think, speaking to children in particular, I think, I've heard it just described to me that children grieve forward, which is an interesting way to think about it. So, as a widowed mom, I'm seeing my son go through the milestones without his dad.
How old is your son now?
He's 15 now.
Okay. We're gonna let you pause for a minute. There's tissues right there. Could you talk about how? I mean, clearly your experience has been a lifelong experience since you were 11, 12.
And I think one of the things about grief not being linear is that all of those future events or future connections that aren't going to happen. Sometimes you anticipate, a birthday's coming up or a wedding is coming up. Okay, this might be hard, like I might need to. But there can be other things that just come out of the blue at you, and you are deep in grief for a little while. And I think that's where it's really important to realize that it's not necessarily linear. And I know for me, one of the things is particularly when other people die, I can, I feel like I go back and I re-grieve all the people that have passed. And for me, with, if a friend or a acquaintance's person kills themselves, all of the experiences come back. And I feel like that's where the grieving is so circular and spiral.
Okay. So I think it's really interesting that you were young when it happened. You have a son, and you're both giving a talk at a children's bookstore, but neither of your books is specifically for a child. Can you tell me, are there materials out there for your son? And why are you speaking at a children's bookstore when you have adult books? I don't know which one of you wants to start.
Well, I know in talking with Pamela Bailey, who runs Hipocampo Books, that she was saying that a lot of customers will come in looking for books for children who are experiencing grief. And you're absolutely right. Our books are not designed for children, but they are very much designed for the adults that are supporting children. And I think my book in particular, I think it can help give a very childlike perspective that, a lot of what you read about grief is not from that perspective. And some of the children's books, which can be quite good, but they're kind of designed to, read to a child and see if this helps them talk about how they're feeling. And that serves one purpose, but I think as an adult, really kind of getting a view into this might be how a child is looking at things, or just because they are wanting to go to their Julius Caesar play at school, that doesn't mean that they're not deeply sad inside. I think as a child, there's a real need to get back a lot of regular routine and familiar things. I know in my family, we did not have a family dinner for a long, long time. And that was, I couldn't really make sense of exactly why that was happening. So there's instances like that, I think, that is important for adults to kind of realize, oh, right, this might be something I want to attend to a bit more.
Yeah, and there's one section in your book that I found really interesting is when your mother, I think, started telling people that she had 2 children instead of 3, or 2 daughters, and didn't mention a son. And I wouldn't have thought about that, but that must have been a really momentous moment when you heard that.
Yes, absolutely. And there are a couple things I've said in the book that I had an aunt who was, saying, how helpful I was. And I really internalized that to be like, oh, I need to be helpful. I need to be responsible. I need to, take care of these things. And I had to tell my aunt after I published the book, I'm not saying that you said the wrong thing. That was a good thing to say, but also maybe could have been followed up with, and you don't have to be helpful all the time.
You don't have to carry this burden all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, your book definitely gets you kind of inside the head of a young person, and I think that is helpful too. All right, Linda, so your book, you actually have a chapter for children, but most of it's not.
Right.
Can you talk about the chapter first of all, and then what you hope the adults and caregivers get from your book that will help children in this?
Sure. Well, I mean, I love that people come to Hipocampo asking that question, how can I support the grieving child? Because I think it's a natural instinct. Like, the children are the vulnerable ones. And so we always want to go towards how can I support them? And I think of this like one of the other areas I work in therapy is postpartum. And so I work with women with perinatal mood disorders, and people say, how can I support the kids with someone with postpartum depression? Well, you support the mom. You support the mom, the kid does better. I remember when my husband was sick, I went to see a social worker, and I was so worried about, is my child going to be okay? And she was very helpful in the sense of she affirmed for me that the research shows that the parents that model grieving and model resilience have the best outcomes for their kids. It's not about the book, although there's a lot of good books, and I actually could speak to that.
We are going to talk about other books too, but
yes,
continue with
but that's the piece. And so if you support the grown-ups, the kids will do better. And so I love that people are going to her bookstore asking, how can I support the kids? Because grief needs a village, and grieving children 100% need a village, especially because usually if there's a child grieving, the rest of the family is grieving. And that is not the best time. It's like postpartum. It's not the best time for you to be the support for someone else, but you're the mom. So you have to, I'm the mom. So I had to be, and I really wrestled with, now I have to be 2 parents now, and I don't know how to play baseball, and I suck at baseball, It's like, so they need a village. My son just went to this place called Camp Kesem, which is for kids that had a family member with cancer. And proud mom moment. Like, the counselor came up to me after, and she's like, your son is the OG here. Like, he is the mentor. He's just being himself, because he knows how to sit with things now without fixing them. And also, those places for kids, just like those places for grown-ups, those grief literate places, provide a place where kids can just be themselves, and they don't have to tiptoe around all the grief illiteracy of taking care of other people. And I'm not saying this in a blaming way at all, like, people saying the wrong thing. You could say completely the right thing, but it's not at the right time, because grief is so individual. But that village is so important. And I think kids' books, one of the books, I'm just going to say this, I don't get any money from saying this, but Raising an Emotionally Healthy Child When a Parent is Sick, that was a super helpful book for my husband and I in terms of learning how to speak to our kid in a developmentally appropriate way, and not say things like, okay, when your person dies, they went to sleep. Because a kid hears that, what's going to happen? They're never going to be able to go to sleep again, right? Or they went to a better place. Well, why don't I get to go there? Like, and what did I do wrong that my person wanted to go somewhere better and not be with me? You know, like all these things people say, and they're trying to be helpful, but all these euphemisms are not helpful, especially for young children. Young children need to hear, you know, they died, not they passed on, not they went to sleep, not that they went on a business trip with Jesus, you know. They died. Their body stopped working. They're not coming back. Here's what we can do now. Here's what you can look ahead to from here now. Or, I don't know, right? We're going to sit at the dinner table, and there's going to be an empty chair. And it's going to be hard. My son and I, like, speaking of the village, one of our neighbors helped him make this little wooden chair. It's like the size of a hand for a little teddy bear that is from his papa, so he could sit at the table with us. So there's like a place for grief at the table. At the table. Does it make it better? Of course it doesn't. You know? Right. Does it honor that there's an empty chair at our table every day, forever? Yes. So it does. And I think the other thing, there's a lot of children's books, and Pamela would be great about speaking to this at Hipocampo.
But she's not here, so you're going to fill us in as best you can. It sounds to me, and we'll get to the books in a second, but it sounds to me like having the responsibility of helping your child through this also helps you.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a way, this is kind of speaking to the post-traumatic growth aspect, but if you choose to, you know, you can make sunflowers from the compost of grief. But I mean, I say that with the caveat of like, you don't have to, you know, don't put that kind of pressure on yourself, you know.
Especially
but
at that time.
If you are supporting a child in grief, then, you know, like for me, I got them into other resources as well as myself, because I know, and I knew I'm not going to be enough. There's a great local organization called Dreams from Drake, and it's a nonprofit supported by a mom and her sister who had a child die, and they support families in the local area, and it's just fabulous. It creates this village. At my son's camp, they don't spend a lot of time on grief. It's like an hour during the week, you know, but they get to just be normal kids. They don't have to deal with all the pity looks and all the stupid things people say. You know, they just get to be normal kids.
Right. Okay. All right. So since we are talking about books and using books to work through grief and live with grief, what are some of your recommendations? What are some of the books that carried you and or your son along?
I can't speak for my son because I think my son needed to kind of compartmentalize for a while. You know, I really wanted to read all the books. I wanted to draw together, and let's do therapy and let's do all these support groups, and and I had to kind of step back and go, you know what? He is grieving the way he is grieving.
And how old was he?
Respect that. He was 8.
Okay.
He was 8. But I do think, like, there's this great book called Tear Soup. I think it's more for adults than kids, but it is a picture book, and it's such a fabulous book about grief, Tear Soup. And then there's a lot of other books that I think kids' books are good at, like, offering metaphors, for really, again, more for the grown-ups than the kids. I mean, the kids might get it, but like The Invisible String and Tear Soup and Badger's Parting Gift and Freddie the Leaf and Max's Box, those are some of my favorites. I read this one book about a girl whose parent had died, but I mean, I loved it. My son didn't want to read it. So you got to honor and respect the child and what works for them. And then you can take that metaphor and talk with them about it and see if it speaks to them.
Yeah, and even a lot of Disney movies I think are really more for the adults if you watch them closely. How about for yourself? And then I want to go to you as well. Your book recommendations, not the children's books, but were there any books that really stood out for you, or still do?
Oh gosh, again, there's so many. I think I could sort of trace chapters and years of like grief
What you
books in
needed
my
when?
life.
Yeah.
Yes. The first year I just wanted to read widow memoirs, because I had so much brain fog and I didn't want to, hear any prescriptions. I just wanted to know someone else has been here. Someone else has been here. They survived. Maybe they thrived. Here's how they did it. And then after that, I went into my like grief nerd phase and I read all the grief theories and I got certified in grief counseling. So now I sort of bounce back and forth between, I just read this great novel called The Poppy Fields. It was such a well done book, and I didn't even know it was about grief. I actually found it in the airport because I had brought this other book on vacation with my son and I was like, oh, this is too heavy to read. I need something light. And I
then you
picked
picked
this
up a
novel
book.
and it was about grief. But it was so good because she just wove it through. All the characters are wrestling with it in some way. So that was a beautiful book. And I love Mary Frances O'Connor's books on the grieving brain and the grieving body. She's a neuroscientist and she bounces back and forth between the neuroscience of grief and her personal experience with grief. So they're just beautifully written.
And Maeve, first, it sounds like you've had a lifelong love for words and writing and books. You had your diaries. Were there any books that you recall as a child that helped you through this, and now what you're reading?
So two sides of that, I guess. One, I'd mentioned Free to Be You and Me, like just the things that I read that were really affirming about life is going to be good, you're going to be okay. People go through hard times and then they're better. I think there were a lot of songs like that I really attracted me when I was little. And I read a lot of poetry in my junior high, high school age. And some of that was very depressing, Sylvia Plath and Janice Ian, and very just gave me some words from other people about the losses and the traumas that they were going through that could be totally different than what I had experienced, the facts of what had happened, but they had this loss and this grief that reading that kind of poetry I obsessed with it as a young tween or teen. And then I will say I did also go through a huge period of time reading lots of memoirs of people who had lost someone, who had parents who were struggling with losses. And I don't know specifically even at the time, I don't think I could have told you what exactly I got from it, but just that like realization of like, oh, yeah, people are experiencing these really difficult things, and that's like me.
Putting into words what people around you might not be able to say.
Right.
Or know how to say.
And I think the other thing I was going to say about children's books is when you, like you were saying, you found Linda, that you found a book at the airport that happened to have this grieving person in it. I think if you can find children's books that have, this person's father died, this person's, lost their grandfather, but the book is actually about something else. And I think children's books do a great job of that. Actually, my mom was a children's librarian, so we had all kinds of books in our house. But, if you're looking at examples of different types of families, you're not necessarily reading a book that is just about, families come in all sizes, but if you're reading a story that has a mom with no father. Right. Okay. I think that is a really just helps normalize the experiences for kids. And I would also say that giving kids, like you were saying, Linda, that kids aren't, they're not living in grief 100% of the time. They're also kids. They want to go play baseball, kickball. They want to draw. They want to, I got a lot of comfort from creating beautiful poetry. I wrote a lot about nature. I wrote a lot about other beautiful things in the world. It was a way to escape. It was a way to create beautiful things, share them, like to just show that, I was not just the sad girl.
Right.
There was a whole other sides.
Okay. I don't know if this is connected at all to what we're talking about, but I think you have another passage from your book that you chose. Could you read a little bit more since we have a little bit of time?
Sure. And this is from one of the reflective chapters, which is a sense of what is going to help when you are supporting someone who's grieving. And it's certainly true for children. Words aren't always the thing that's going to help them the most. Mm-hmm. And this is a chapter called A Time to Embrace. After crying, there needs to be a hug. It is the embrace that has brought me the most support. Hugging is the one thing, the only thing that I can say helps. Whether it is because of the sheer physical sense of touch, the releasing of endorphins noted to be found in a 20-second hug, or the holding of someone else's burdens, however briefly, hugging a person through grief works. I have been both the receiver and the giver. I have been the casual friend and the best friend, the mourning daughter and the fellow survivor. Offering an embrace helps when words fall short, when promises of better days sound false, and when the loss is so profound that taking a friend in arms is the clearest way to express, I am here with you. Grief support is less about removing pain and more about holding life together.
I think that was the perfect phrase to wrap us up with. Will you? What is the one thing that, or maybe more than one thing, that you really hope people take away from your book when they read it?
For me, it's definitely that it will start conversations. And that I'd love also that it would start people writing on their own. And one of the things I'm doing with this book and after this book is doing some more writing workshops and creativity workshops to encourage people to use.
Will they be connected to this book?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
some will be. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But definitely starting conversations. And I just ran into a neighbor on the street, and she was saying that she had read the book and she had lost a brother when she was young, and she bought a copy for her sister, and they read it together, and they had, they talked late into the night. And that kind of response is wonderful.
That's what you're hoping for. How about you, Linda? What are you hoping people get when they read After Your Person Dies?
I think the main thing is to feel less alone. I would also hope that it would serve to give the reader permission to be where they are and cultivate an ongoing relationship with grief based on questions like, what do you have to teach me now, rather than when are you going to go away so I can move on? And of course, if it speaks to you, I would hope it would serve as an invitation to write or draw or collage or paint your grief process.
Or all of that, as you
therapist.
did.
Right?
Okay. So you were setting out to write a children's book. Is there still a children's book in you on this topic, or is that not going to happen?
We'll
Because
see.
it sounds to me like there is somewhat of a shortage of books for children specifically on this, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's enough to have something for parents. But is there either one of you?
We'll see. I mean, I'm currently working on a more on the art of grieving kind of kind of a
Okay.
book, The Art of Grieving, and then cross out grieving and put living, kind of a thing.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm looking forward to both of those things. So let's talk we have about a minute or so left. Talk about your talk that's coming up. Originally, I think it was in August, but now it's September 3rd, I believe. Can you tell us the logistics of all of that and what you'll be doing?
Sure. Yeah, it's at Hipocampo Books, which is at 638 South Avenue, and Thursday, September 3rd at 6:30. We're going to. It's really going to be a conversation about grief, much like this. I think both Linda and I were very excited at the idea of it being just a conversation and not just a here's my book, I'll sign it for you kind of event. And we'll share our books and our experiences, but also talking about the complexity of grief and with an emphasis on supporting grieving children.
And how did this come about, this whole idea for this event? You don't remember?
I have to give credit to Pamela Bailey.
Pamela.
Yeah, I think we had both talked to her, and then she got the idea of putting us together.
Well, I think it's a great idea. It sounds like a wonderful event, and I wish you both success. Thank you very much for being with us. This is Maeve Cullinane, author of Almost 12, Uncovering My Journey Through Grief. And we also had Dr. Linda Shanti here, author of After Your Person Dies, Affirmations for Grief, Making Meaning, and Going On. This has been Connections. I'm Julie Philipp, sitting in for Evan Dawson, and I would like to thank our production team and our listeners, and I will be back tomorrow to wrap up the week. Until then, take care.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.